Hey everyone, it's Patricia. My article was called Not Just for Fun Anymore, a qualitative exploration of social norms. The author was Anne Kristen Sollerhead. Publication year was 2023. The journal it was in was Frontiers in Psychology, and the purpose or the question of the research was to find out if the activity levels and how early educators feel about physical activity and movement and other perceptions affect their teaching on gross motor skills and physical activity to their students. For the methodology, they used 68 preschoolers in southern Sweden and 359 early childhood educators and caretakers. Um, Only 61% of the educators participated in the study with the surveys. So that's about 219 educators. Um, they were trying to find out through these questionnaires that they were giving teachers if the frequency of the motor skill and physical activity that the teachers taught in the early childhood level was correlated to several factors, such as physical activity levels, how confident or qualified that educator felt about teaching those skills, how much the educator thinks the student practices at home or does physical activity at home, such as like play or things like that, how these skills fit into their curriculum or how the educator felt that those skills fit into their curriculum, and how much the educator enjoyed being physically active. So again, they did this with questionnaires to assess the teacher's experience and perception on teaching motor skills and physical activity. This data was on the questions that I just listed. So some of their key findings were that two-thirds, which is roughly 146 out of that 219 of those educators reported that training motor skills once a week or less, that they were doing that. They were only training once a week or less, while only 25%, which is about 55 of those educators, offered motor skill training every day, which is a very small number, and that's quite concerning. Um, Only four-fifths, which is 100, well, actually, so four-fifths, which is 175 of those 219 educators, reported teaching movement and physical activity once a week or less. And then only a fifth, which is 44 of those educators, said that they offer moderate to vigorous physical activity every day or every other day. So again, very small numbers there with teachers actually doing what they needed to do for those kids at that age level. And about 30% of the educators said they seldom or never do moderate to vigorous physical activity. Um, like talking about how much the educator does physical activity. 40% reported regular physical activity going once or twice a week, and then 30% reported that they do physical activity 3 or 4 times a week. So that can kind of affect how often they teach those skills in their classrooms. Some data trends and standout conclusions. The first one is that the likelihood of meaningful physical activity implementation almost doubles when the educator reported participating in physical activity during their free time. So again, I just mentioned that that was only about 30% of the educators who participated in the study. So only about 30% of those kids that are being studied are getting those necessary benefits from actually teaching physical activity in those age groups. An example of this is an example of the educator's beliefs, experiences, and attitudes towards physical activity, determining how often physical activity is addressed in their classrooms. The second point that I wanted to mention is that if the educator believed that free play was helpful in improving children's gross motor skills, then they were almost 3 times more likely to implement movement and physical activity at least once every other day. While this sounds like it might be a positive thing, it actually can be negative. So this is like the easiest way to implement physical activity. Like think about recess or something like that, where the teacher plays a passive supervisor role and they're not really teaching any movement skills. They're just allowing the kids to free play and run and move their bodies. Again, this sounds great in perspective, but free play is not always better than an intentional movement plan or training type of physical activity due to like the large varieties of equipment offered or different places having different types of playgrounds and whatnot, different options. Sometimes equipment can be limited. Sometimes kids have like groups of kids that they like to play with. There's a lot of other factors that go into free play that can affect how much actual motor skill training they receive during that free play. So overall, these are two major like big problems that are mentioned in this article. And physical activity is not implemented enough, as I mentioned in the first point, and in early education at least. And the go-to form to teach these kids the movement skills is just free play, which is not always beneficial. So why does this matter to us? So movement and physical activity at the preschool age, which is about 0 to 5, can influence body fat percentage, bone density, and increase or decrease their risk for heart disease later in life. The educators, so going back to that previous point, had movement skills being implemented at this age have a huge health concern or health factor that determines how they might live their life later on. Um, Educators' influence on the student's motor skill development at this stage is significant and can be a determining factor if that person goes on to live a healthy life or um, with full of activity because they feel confident doing that because they received the training they needed during that time, or if they choose to go sedentary lifestyle full of morbidity later on because they do not feel comfortable or confident doing these things because they didn't do them at a young age. Um, Third, the research and discussions about how an educator's underlying attitudes affect what is being taught in their classroom concerning motor skills and physical activity is not frequently approached or talked about. And so the conversations that need to happen to provoke change are not happening. And this is not good because we can't change these things if they're not brought up. And then the educators can act either, so this is a quote from the actual article. It says the educators can act either as a facilitator or a barrier to children's motor development. So just depending on the educator's like experience and what they enjoy doing and all these other factors can determine whether they help the student get to the right path or they lead the student down the wrong path. Um, the practical applications for coaches. So, how could this research inform your coaching or teaching practices? I thought that as I was reading this, it was prompting me to evaluate like how I teach elementary PE, which isn't the same age group, but those younger grade levels, like kindergarten, first grade, are still needing a lot of motor skills. Even second grade, need a lot of motor skill development and like spatial awareness and all these other factors. So I was kind of asking myself, like, do I spend enough time teaching motor skills? Do I spend more time teaching other activities because those are things I enjoy doing? Like, do I teach more striking activities because that's what I'm comfortable teaching because I played tennis for 8 years, or, I really like the throwing and catching games. So do I kind of spend more time on this activity than motor skills where I really need to be spending a lot of our time there at those younger age groups? And then it also made me feel like I need to spend, like I said, more time with those motor skill development with those younger age groups. What changes or strategies would you implement based on the findings? So I only see my elementary kids once a week, just because, again, we're a small school. I can't control that. But what I can offer to other like parents and educators is different ways they can get their students moving in the classroom, or other ways parents can implement physical activity in their household. So I can send those things home with the kids, or I could talk to the other classroom teachers about that type of thing. Um, and then I could also share this information with our preschool teachers because, again, we're all in the same building. So it'd be really easy for me to reach out to them and say, hey, I learned this about um, implementing these motor skills in my master's class. I think that these are worth trying. And our preschool actually does a pretty good job of trying to teach those early developmental programs into their curriculum, but everything can be improved, so it's worth bringing up to them as well. So finally, my discussion questions are: question 1, what steps would you recommend an early educator, teacher, or coach take to better implement movement and physical activity in their daily routine? Um, you can kind of assume their perspective, or you can kind of hone in on one of the specific perspectives mentioned in the article. Or you can think of someone specific from your class or from your teaching experiences. Question number 2, explain what the long-term effects would be for a student who does not get the right amount of motor skill development at this age. Sorry, there was a typo. And then question number 3, if you know that developing fundamental moves through play and enjoyable movements at this young age is important and vital to their health and can lead to negative lifelong effects if underdeveloped, why do you think these skills do not get prioritized at this age? What barriers are in the way for these educators to not teach this subject? So those are my 3 questions. I look forward to hearing your guys' responses. Thanks for taking the time to watch my presentation. Bye.